I'm joined on stage by Andrew Adonis, who is former National Infrastructure Commissioner, and now he tells me he's campaigning against Brexit. I'm also joined by Georgia Gould, who is the leader of Camden Council in North London, Alison Inman, who is the president of the Chartered Institute of Housing at the moment and has previously done dozens of jobs in housing and the public sector, and Greg Beals, who is the new director of Communications, Policy and Campaigns at Shelter, the housing charity. So first of all, I'm going to invite Andrew to tell us in 4 minutes what we can do to solve the housing crisis and make it work for everybody, not just the rich.
Thanks very much. Can I first of all apologise for that I'm not Tony Lloyd, who I think you were expecting. This is my penance for the fact that I arrived late for my last session because I got the time wrong. So I ended up at the end of that session, they said, as a penance for not arriving on time, you can also do this session too. But housing is, how can I put it? I mean, because I'm a railway buff. It's almost as important an issue as the future of the national railway system. And it's good to have a chance to say a few words. In my experience of politics and policy over a few years now, most big questions are in fact simple. The issue isn't analysing what needs to be done, it's getting a sufficient political consensus to be able to do it. Now, housing is not a complicated issue. We have, starting with the Labour government of 1945, but right through actually until the late 70s, we did have a record of massive house building in this country. Massive. You remember we had, Labour started it after 1945 with big slum clearance and all that. Remember that Owen Bevan was Minister for Housing as well as Minister for Health. In order to compete in the centre ground, as it then was, Harold Macmillan was Minister of Housing in 1951, and his big thing was 300,000 homes a year. And he got Ernest Marples, who was his junior minister, he was a businessman, to build them. I mean, literally, with huge plans in the Ministry of Housing for building them. And Ernest Marples was a slightly crooked character. I mean, his own company ended up getting a lot of the contracts, so we'll go there. But nonetheless, the Tories then were in the right place politically and intellectually. Labour carried this through until in the 1960s and 70s. And alongside that, as well as promoting massive house building, two other things happened. The first was, at national level, the first was that local authorities built hugely. We have never built more than 200,000 homes a year in this country without local authorities being a key part of the home building effort. And the second thing that's crucially important is the state itself sponsored new towns. The key date to have in mind on this is 1967. 1967 was the peak year for home building since the war, when 438,000 housing units were completed. It's also the last year that the state designated a new town, Milton Keynes. And the mentality of the state under a Labour government, which designated new towns, which of course is a central government taking a really big role, and actually, it wasn't just a new town, it was a new city essentially, taking the initiative to do that, is exactly the same mentality that saw local authorities as big home builders and the state motivating the private sector too. So this isn't, in my view, complicated, just as well as we've only got now 2 minutes left. It's actually simple. What needs to happen is all the stuff that the government is doing at the moment, well, a lot of it is a bit besides the point. Some of it is actually retrograde in terms of just giving massive mortgage subsidies, which is essentially is happening to people who could look after themselves. But the big missing link on this, and it's a very simple one, is the state, local and national, as a home builder and planner itself. What is needed is for Georgia and brilliant Labour leaders, and indeed Tory leaders, local authority leaders up and down the country, now to be told that, like the 1960s and the 1950s, they are to become big home builders again. They're going to be allowed to borrow to do it because, we have record low interest rates. There never was a better time to be borrowing to build infrastructure, and they should be set targets agreed with government for how many units that they're going to build. And at the same time, the state itself should start once again designating new towns, particularly in the Midlands and southern England, where there's a massive shortage of housing, and particularly around transport hubs, where bringing all migrant interests together, where you can have really significant new housing with really good public transport links, which means that we're not just adding to congestion on the roads. That's what needs to happen. It's quite straightforward. it just needs a will. It needs to overcome some ideological blockages on the part of the Conservatives, because it means that local authorities need to get building again. But when I say it's an ideological blockage, it just seems to be an ideological blockage in kind of Thatcherite Britain. Across the rest of the world, rest of Europe, the centre-right parties don't have any problem with local authorities being home builders and managers. It's just a kind of blockage that's come here. And we then need to build a consensus around it. Just one final point. I was brought up on one of Georgia's council estates in Agar Grove, only a mile away from here. It was my dad still lives there. He still has the same flat, council flat that he got in 1960. He gives me a running commentary on the quality of Georgia's housing management operation. Let Georgia into a secret. It's not always the most flattering of commentaries, but I can assure you it's a very, very great deal better than it was in the 1970s and 80s. Local authorities got significantly better as managers. The big mistake of the, I mean, there were design issues. We weren't great at designing a lot of these estates. We need high quality design really mainstreamed in the development and design of new settlements. But the big problem then, in my view, was mono-tenure. What we as a party should be about is creating new communities and mixed communities. And mixed communities are vital. You get social mixing that hugely improves people's life chances. It massively improves social mobility. It means people lead a much higher quality of life. So when we, as will happen, because we will win through on this eventually, we get the next generation of local authorities being in the vanguard of home building, what we need them to do is to be developing mixed communities, social rent, commercial rent, for sale, all in the same communities. Then we will become one big successful community, which of course is the very reason why the Labour Party was established. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good to know you have a mole in there for Georgia. Georgia, would you like to respond? You can obviously not just talk about what Andrew has asked you to.
Yeah. Well, at least you didn't bring up the quality of our dog mess collection, which is the normal thing. I think nobody has to tell us as local authority leaders that we should build housing. We are building housing, and we're desperate to do more. And we're in Camden. We're in Camden here, which is an amazing mixed community. It's the bedrock of that has been our social mix, our mixed housing, as you talked about. But we feel as local authority leaders in London that all of that is under threat. And if I think about my day-to-day life, it's the housing crisis comes into it. Every single day you meet people who are suffering in Camden because of the lack of access to affordable housing. So I went to a homeless shelter the other night, which is a winter emergency night shelter, and there were people sleeping there on the floor who'd come home from a day's work, which is just should not be the case. I've got pensioners who are being made homeless, young people. You have 500 families in temporary accommodation, often in one room. We just do not have, in a borough like Camden, with the access to enough housing. And it's because, I think, of a national will to back local authorities. So as a local authority, we are doing what we can in this context. We chose in 2010 to see the land that we owned as our commonwealth. We built some private housing to invest in the first council housing since the 1970s in Camden, in new schools, in new homeless shelters, some new housing in Agar Grove, in fact, and we are building really quality council housing alongside our tenants. And recently we were featured two of our housing estate projects in REBA, an exhibition of quality architecture, which we were really proud about. But I think I was most proud that our tenants had called me up to tell me about it and to take me around, and were able to tell me, where they'd helped us fix the fittings and how they were part of building that new housing. And we're really ambitious about being a developer over the long term as a council, but there are huge blocks. I think the first is absolutely the borrowing cap. Government have said that they want to back councils that are house builders, and we've written to government to say that we want to build more housing, that the first thing they need to do is to completely lift the borrowing cap, as Andrew said. They need to stop putting restrictions on the right to buy money that we get. They need to let us keep it all. They need to let us set local rents with our tenants. and they need to give us new rights, new powers to intervene in the private rented sector where so many of our residents live. And if they did that, we could have a new era of public house building. And I think that we're ready to build up that capacity, that in-house capacity across councils to deliver it. But I think that at the moment we have a 1.4 billion capital programme and less than 2% of that comes from central government. So we're having to do it all ourselves. And as everyone knows, given the tragedy of Grenfell and the fire safety demands that we all have that are a massive priority, there's been absolutely no money forthcoming from government to invest in fire safety. So councils are faced with this impossible position where we're making choices between investing in new housing, investing in our current stock, investing in fire safety, or all of the other health and safety concerns that tenants have around damp and so on. And as Andrew was talking about, the housing management. It felt like there was a moment after Grenfell that the national debate had changed, and that there was going to be a true investment in social housing, but it feels that that moment is slipping away, and I think we have a massive campaigning role as a movement to take that on.
Just very briefly, can you, just for the audience, can you explain what the government have done in terms of, releasing or not releasing cash for Grenfell? I know that obviously the government have said that money will be no object in fire safety, but councils, councils have come out and said they've had no access to the cash, as you mentioned. Yeah,
so in Camden we had to evacuate 5 of our blocks when we found out that they had partly the same cladding as Grenfell and a number of other fire safety issues. We spent tens of millions on emergency works, and there was promises made that money would be available. We've obviously made those requests to government and had absolutely no money. So that's come out of, at the moment, our capital budget has come out of money that was earmarked for new housing and for other repairs. And so if we don't get that money from government, we'll have to say to people that actually that damp that they were waiting to get fixed will take a bit longer. And there's been no money anywhere. And it's going to be, it's so expensive. Taking down the cladding and replacing that cladding costs tens of millions anywhere. And we've only just started, I think, to understand the scale of the need in terms of fire safety, in terms of council blocks, but also in private blocks. And, the expense in keeping night watch and all the things you need to do to keep people safe is huge. And I think that government just aren't prepared to accept the responsibility at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. Alison, obviously you've just taken up posts at Chartered Institute of Housing, so what are your thoughts on how we can fix this thing?
I think the problem with a